professors.
Professor, yeah, no, actually, I was an adjunct professor or instructor for a while. Adjuncts are actually on the rise. In fact, it's gotten so bad that a group of adjuncts actually banded together a few years ago to try to form a union because they actually are underemploying instructors. So your professors are not getting rich off of paychecks. Research grants, a few lucky ones, but they're few and far between. So then, what else could it be going towards? Technology, yeah. Probably somewhat, but that's actually not what the study did. Administration, yes. Yes, is this room bugged? This is the last time I got invited to Miami University. No, actually, in education, in all quarters across everything, the cost of administration is the #1 price increase, according to a study done by New York Times. That is actually what has gone up the most. I heard that one university has 11 directors of diversity. I'm a big fan of, I like the term inclusion, I'm a big fan of actually ensuring that teams and things represent our society at large, so that I think you only build good products if your products represent your customer base. But the only reason I can explain having 11 directors of diversity was that you needed diversity in the position. That would be the only justification. But that seems a little excessive. So yes, administration is the #1 cost. Of course, that's also what drives up the cost of healthcare and pretty much everything else. So, which is why I'm a libertarian anarchist, because it's cheaper. That was a pretty good introduction already.
That's pretty good.
Maybe for Dr. Covello, very nervous there with that question, didn't I?
Yeah.
So after this, we will be holding an administration cost riot.
Get your picket signs.
I'm not here, okay?
And we're going to randomly grab the JP Morgan deal.
Not mind
for
me.
a reason that it will be funny.
All right, we'll go ahead and get this thing started. So 10XDS is a startup focused on democratizing capital and improving access to investment opportunities for people of all income levels. 10XDS leverages blockchain to reduce the cost of regulatory compliant trading and engaging investors in smaller increments. Today we have John Bentley here, along with Yogesh from 10XDS. John Bentley is the CTO of 10XDS. He is AKA the Code Wookie and has over 25 years in IT and software development, with experience spanning software architecture, programming, and infrastructure. John has worked in enterprises, small businesses, startups, and as a freelance developer. John has been focused on blockchain technologies for the past 2 years, with an emphasis on data-oriented solutions and private chains. We also have Yogesh here, who is the lead developer and blockchain analyst at 10XDS. Yogesh has a background in mechanical and aerospace engineering, with a focus on modeling complex system dynamics. Yogesh has leveraged this experience to the application of blockchain systems to real-world use cases. Yogesh has spent the last 2 years analyzing blockchain technologies to understand their advantages and disadvantages for different application scenarios. Welcome our guests. Thank you, guys.
Thanks for letting us come tonight. I brought Yogesh with me in case you ask any hard technical questions. While I understand blockchain technology, I focus much more on the application side, and Yogesh is actually, he's actually one of, 30 to 50 people on the planet that can install a blockchain known as Graphene and keep it running. So he's actually an elite set of people. Make sure you tell his immigration worker that too, because the H-1B process is terrible. Kevin actually worked with us this summer. He was stuck in a tiny room, not so much with me because I got stuck on something else, but his arm did not look like that, and because we can't afford to have injuries. I actually worked as an intern at IDEA one summer, and my manager told me, he just went to a training, he says, just to let you know, if you die on the job, I will drag your body off campus because it'll be less paperwork. So that's a management philosophy I carried with me to keep paperwork down. One of the things, so I put my introduction, I'm interested in data-oriented blockchains. I'm actually what I call a crypto heretic. I actually don't believe in the revolution. I think Bitcoin and cryptocurrency has its place. I don't think the technology is going to change everything overnight, and that's because I'm old and I've watched the world change, and it tends to change really slowly, and I still know who's outgunned, and that's pretty much all of us. So I always joke and they say, we need to disarm. I say, that's fine, the government go first, and once they disarm, the rest of us will. So, I have a lot of interest though in blockchain applications and different ways that we can use it to the general benefit. What I do see in blockchain is a chance to decrease the amount of overhead in transactions, to get settlements faster, and more importantly, to give more control, my hope is, over our own data. We do see blockchain as creating a revolution, but I'll say it in an evolutionary time frame. It's more, not months, but years. That we can actually do things like, one of the products we're focusing on now is Communibond, and we've always been looking at investables with 10xDS and with blockchain technology, regulatory compliant traditional investments, because there's needs for plenty of opportunity there. Specifically municipal bonds now, because in the world of capital, if you live in a city or a county that's issuing a bond, the odds are you can't buy it. And that's because they're almost always sold through large dealers, and those are very closed groups. And you have to have $5,000 to start, which the average citizen doesn't have lying around. At the same time, banks are buying these up and paying the pathetic 0.5% to % of savings on the spread they're making off the municipal bonds. Now, to add insult to injury, if you're living in a municipality, you're paying the taxes that pay the interest on that bond. And all of that is tax-free interest, whereas the whereas the savings account, you're making the percent instead of 5% on as tax. So we see this as a great opportunity, and that's why we're focused on this area. And so with that, we've had to deal a lot with the idea of permission versus permissionless blockchains. I think I have the science backwards. This was actually a talk that I was first invited to give at Blockchain West, and it got canceled. So I've been dying to have other chances to roll this out. But from the first time I've talked to now, to see a number 1 on here, I'm actually starting to move this more towards an idea of an expanded topic, or maybe even a Udemy course or something, because it's such a broad topic. So the question is, as always with blockchain, when you're looking to solve a blockchain problem, there's not one blockchain that fits all. In fact, I think several problems will require more than one blockchain to solve, just because of the amount of data that it creates. So you have to look at what's appropriate for your blockchain application and why. And the first aspect we're going to look at tonight is network participation. And I'll give a little context on that. But I wanted to turn this thing off so I don't lose the battery. I haven't turned it back on yet. So we live in a world that has a lot of open spaces. So public parks are open. You can walk around city sidewalks, usually during daylight, nighttime, get a little more sketchy. You can walk into most businesses and transact. Very open spaces where there's really not a lot of need for minimal security and different types of things. And then we have things that are more restricted. So if you think of, my favorite thing to think about is actually Kings Island, because I am a roller coaster junkie. I'm on my 3rd year of a gold card. I will go up, I used to work up closer to there. I used to go after work and just ride a few roller coasters. So what's interesting is, versus a public park, you buy a ticket, everybody can go in. But not everybody can operate a ride. Now I would love to have, they have gold card days. I would love to have gold card operator ride day. I don't know what the liability of that would look like. It would be hilarious, not for the riders, but for the operators. So we have these things that are restricted functions, and this is a reality, and so it depends on what it is. In a public park, anybody can operate the equipment. So someone can push the swing, someone can push the, they don't have these anymore. We used to have these giant circles, we call them merry-go-rounds. And what they really were they were the circles of death. And you got the biggest kid possible, a lot of times that was me, to get the thing to spin as fast as you could, and then the fat kid like me would jump on and lean forward and get it going faster. Kids would be flying off and stuff. It was pandemonium. And it was open and no one was stopping us. They got rid of them because they're dangerous. So, sorry, you guys missed out. But again, at Amusement Park, not everybody can operate a ride, probably because of what we saw when we did the merry-go-round. So we have this world where sometimes we're permissionless, things are open, and sometimes we have different roles, we're permissioned. And that is what has come up in blockchain. You know, in the old days of blockchain, everything was considered permissionless and all public. So that's why we call it permissionless, because the new stuff is permissioned. And the permissionless permission goes through two areas. When I first looked this up, I think of it from an application level, because that's the level I work at. So I call it network participation. People that are on the network doing transactions. There's an idea of permissionless, where you can do everything on there, or permission where you can only do some things. Whereas there's also permissionless and permissioned block production. So if you think of, again, a Bitcoin and classic Ethereum, it's proof of work. You go download the mining software, the block production software. You become a node on the network. You start producing blocks. You start earning Bitcoin, a lot less than you used to. Ethereum recently moved to a proof of stake. So now you actually have to own enough Ethereum and get voted in to do it. So now they've got a more of a permission model. And there's advantages and disadvantages to that. There's also the aspect of public versus private blockchain, and then figuring out actually how to choose it overall. So tonight we're going to focus on network participation. I will send out some information if you're interested in learning more about it, as I have stuff available so that you can get access to it. So again, actually I kind of went through this, but we talk about the different roles on a playground. So there are no roles. This mom is not certified to push this swing. Maybe 5 more years from now the way the world's going. Right now there's no certification. A child can be pushing that swing. Typically an older sibling that's forced to do it because they won't stop screaming. And I can actually get on that truck and ride it. Other parents complain and take pictures and put it on Facebook, but I'll do it anyways. So that happens. So like we talked about the amusement park, there's riders, but there's also there's riders, there's ride operators, there's people that sweep up. So not everybody that's employed there can actually operate a ride. I think there's probably an age restriction on who can operate a ride and who can't. And then there's this one poor guy at Kings Island that was having trouble making an ice cream cone. So that was his maximum ability. So he wouldn't be operating a ride. Maybe he like runs the place now. It's hard to say. So you have these kind of things, and then you even have different levels of access sometimes. There's actually this old term that you may see in an old paper called an e-ticket. When Disneyland first opened up, they actually sold ride levels. So you had an A-ticket, which was like usually for little kids. They only ride little kid rides. And then you had to pay more and you get access to more rides. So Space Mountain would have been on the e-ticket back when it was a thrill ride. At Kings Island now, they actually have, so you buy your ticket for, what is it, $400 now. It's like $40–50 to get in on a day. Well, if you want a fast pass, it's like another $60. But then if you want the fast pass with a couple of extra rides, then it's like $80. So they actually have 2 levels of fast pass now. So you get different things. I went for the haunted thing. The haunted fast pass was different than the other fast pass. So you buy different levels of access. So there's different rights even within memberships. So these are the kind of permission models that are in the real world. So because of that, we need to reflect these in our blockchain solutions. For network participation, we go with traditional permissionless. And again, permissionless is kind of like, I think, is the default state. So everyone with an account has read access. They can see all data. And in fact, in a lot of them, even people without an account can see all the transactions, or at least all the blocks and all the history and things like that. So very open a lot of times, for the most part. Everyone has the same rights. So anyone can create an asset on one of these chains. They have to pay the fee, but they can create their own asset. And anybody can conduct transactions. And assets, once they're, if you're the creator of the asset or if you own the asset only exists in your account. So wallet is the best technology term I've ever actually heard used, because fortunately this is not all the money that I have right now. Some days it is. But if I lose this wallet, if this is all the money I had, I could never get it back. So when we say that an asset controls everything, we mean that the wallet actually controls everything. There is no control, there's no help beyond that. Everybody hear about well, he died. The CEO from, was it a Canadian company? Yeah, he died and took the keys with him to an escrow, and took with him to the afterlife as escrow keys. But he died in a part of India that is known for people using to disappear.
And then the money got lost from the gold account.
Yeah.
Because we lost the money moved out.
In other words, he's on the island. The island that JFK, Elvis, and Marilyn Monroe live on, and Hitler, he lives on that island too now. So that's permissionless. And permissioned, first, even read access isn't guaranteed. So read access to information on a permission blockchain is granted. And you can grant partial read access, you can grant the whole read access, and you can decide if you're requiring an account or not. So even the idea of transparency, there can be levels of transparency. So there's more, use the opposite word, opacity to a permission blockchain. Asset creation and transactions, the rights can be restricted. And this can be based on if you just have one asset class, but if you had different kinds of assets. So a lot of times, they still use the term asset, but it's really kind of like more like records. So, so if I have, I could have stocks and bonds as separate things, or municipal bonds on a financial exchange, and only stocks to be created by maybe a stock exchange that it's registered on. So even a company can create its own stock. It would require a stock exchange. Municipal bond can only be created by a government entity. So you can actually do those kinds of restrictions and decide who can do assets and who can do what kinds of transactions. So you have much more fine-grained control. It's actually a lot like role-based security, or more like access control lists that we use in typical computer systems. And then there's actually a lot of times the ability to delegate asset control to other accounts. So, so there's the ability to give someone permissions to actually take actions on your behalf. So if like if you're worried about losing your keys, you might have somebody you really trust also have access to your account, so you didn't lose full access. So that gets to be the big difference between the two. Some of the observations I've had from this: permissionless really benefits. The number one thing, and I think this is one not to gloss over, it's really easy to administer. So if you're going to put out a system, and anybody ever built a system where you had to you have the login and password of the user? So simple web system, right? Login and password. Really easy to do, even with a hash. It's really built in. There's tutorials on it. But you know what's harder to do? The forget password functionality. Because now you've got to know their email, or you got to have a hash, you got to have a page that disappears, you got to have timeouts. So dealing with the adverse cases actually becomes a lot harder. In fact, most software, we have what we call the happy path, which is the stuff like it's the stuff that they say, well, this is easy. You just do this, 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 and this. And you get to step one, you say, well, what if they forget their password? You get to step two and say, well, what if they register, but they never actually set their password? Is their account timeout? Does it go away? Those kind of things. Step three, I mean, you actually make the business person quite freaking out. That's why you end up getting to write most of your own requirements in the field. But you actually can't get requirements from a user. You get kind of the gist, and then you kind of fill in a lot of the gaps. And then a lot of times the requirements aren't that good, so you make them better. So administration is really easy. People sign up for themselves usually, and then there's nothing else. There's no central administration. The other aspect is that, and this is one of the things that's really made the first blockchain so popular, is that you really feel like you own the thing because you have the same access rights as everyone else. There's no one in the fast pass lane going past you waiting for the ride. There's no waiting for a table. When someone else has a reservation or called ahead. You have the same rights as everyone else. You are equal. And there's not a lot of places in this world, despite our legal and other definitions, where we feel truly equal all the time. So there's really something to be said for that. That's also why I think blockchain's become very emotional in that sense of ownership. The first issue, though, is that there's a lot of use cases that require, different kinds of access. And so because of that, your choice is either everybody gets the same access or you have to build it somehow into the system. So I use a silly example I like. Customer reviews. One of the important things Amazon started adding in is verified purchaser, because actually I studied social media marketing with my MBA, and customer reviews are really important. And in fact, people don't trust reviews if they're all good. People like to read good reviews and bad reviews and contrast them to make their buying decision. So, but there's also some products you'll see on Amazon that don't have verified reviews, and you'll feel like someone's just paid somebody to go do reviews, right? And this has been a big problem historically with Twitter and fake followers and things like that. So we're kind of hooked to that. So I can imagine a blockchain for reviews. Well, a review is a great thing for public blockchain. Everybody can read it. You can write your own reviews and manage your own reviews. So you have ownership of that, but no one else can mess with your reviews, except maybe vote if they're helpful or not, but that's their vote. So there's things like that. But the question is, for a verified purchase, how do you put that on there? Well, that's not something you give everybody. You could have at the system level, if you register your review account with Amazon, it pushes to you what products you have available to review. So that way now you've got an aspect built into the blockchain that creates a default permission. Just like Bitcoin, correct me if I'm wrong, but you can only do two-party transactions, right? I can only do a debit credit, so I can't split a check 3 ways. I have to have different people pay. Not a big deal, but I mean it's that kind of thing. So to add these kind of rules in, it ends up being built in at the platform level. And then sometimes in the real world, again, depending on where you're at, there's been some case law around this already. You have to freeze an account. So there was a guy getting divorced, and he had a Bitcoin account, and there was a court order for his account not to be used. So I don't know how they did an affidavit, or I don't remember the particulars. I just remember that it was considered to be an issue and something they were watching closely, because there was no way for the court to freeze that. A court can freeze your bank account. If you don't believe me, donate to the wrong charity, or don't pay your taxes. The IRS loves accounts. They love modern banking. So what the IRS does, if you have a tax dispute, is the IRS is really friendly. They say, we only want what you owe us. So what we're going to do is take everything you have, and we're going to put it in this bucket over here, and you just prove what's yours, and we'll give it back. And that's a great negotiating position to be in, but you're not in it. So there's those kind of things that happen, which is actually part of the reason why people like Bitcoin, is because it actually gets away from some of those. Bitcoin actually became more legitimate during the Greek financial crisis. The Greek currency was becoming so devalued, people actually used Bitcoin as a safe haven. It was easier to get into than gold. And that's actually when Bitcoin started coming up on the radar as a legitimate currency, versus prior to that, when it was mainly associated with questionable to illegal transactions, and with the Silk Road and things like that. So it's a good safe haven. So I think there's still a tremendous opportunity for public blockchain, but you really are looking to build community, to build that joint ownership, that collective aspect, and you also are looking, we're being able, the public, especially public access is essentially, you're really trying to create that transparency. That's where public blockchain still has a large role to play. On the other side, when you're doing a lot of use cases, the second you start needing permissions and roles, the second you start having different roles and different abilities to do things, if you don't want to build them into the platform, which can be cumbersome depending on the application, you start looking at permission blockchain. The other downside of custom gateways, or oracles, they call them in Ethereum coding terms, is that becomes an off-chain activity. So that becomes the place you go hack because you're off the chain. So whenever you start looking at use cases, there's a lot of these, especially in business. That's why permission blockchains really started to rise, the enterprise interest in blockchain. And that's why Hyperledger, I think all the blockchains on it are permission. But they all also have to come from companies that work with enterprise. So that goes together. But with that, you are better able to manage things like data visibility and security. You're also able to meet the different legal obligations. And that is something, if you're running a company that's behind a chain, you really have to be concerned about, because there was a kind of hands-off on social media for a while, and we're starting to see that change. Right? Everybody here, Mark Zuckerberg called for increased regulation of the internet. That's exactly what you do when you're the leader of a new technology. You call for more regulation because it makes it harder for everyone else and it reduces his liability. Zuckerberg's not being a great guy. Zuckerberg's protecting his business interests. I only can fault him for that because up to the point where he's actually being a good CEO, he's doing his job. But there's nothing humanitarian about that. Don't believe the press. So the other issue, the issue you run into is that, when people are watching this permission, they know there's only certain things they can do. They won't feel that same sense of ownership. It will not be the same. And it is more complex. So you have to decide who's going to administer it. So when you're looking at providing a blockchain as a service, and you're looking at maybe running a consortium, it could be that your organization, like in our case, when we first start up, we'll have to administer accounts and security. Well, that's an expense we have to take on, responsibility, and it's something also that will come under scrutiny from time to time. And that's why you'll need governance. If you don't want one person running, if it's a true consortium with some balance, who are you going to allow to see what? Because one of the things blockchain creates is trust. But the reason why you're paying more for blockchain, which I like to call the most expensive way to solve a problem, is because you don't trust each other. So giving up administrative right is actually a risky thing to do. It gets to be scary. So this gets to become a big issue. And then, I think that you're going to see more permission blockchain solutions than you are permissionless, just because of the need to meet regulators and meet laws, but also because, at least for a period of time, people aren't going to trust the technology. They're going to want to be able to balance what's already existing, and so they want something that mimics more closely what actually is going on in the real world, outside of blockchain. So when trying to figure out whether you need permissioned or permissionless, I think the simplest thing to do is actually ask the most fundamental questions. What roles, and these are in an order, but they build on each other. What roles you're going to have, what assets, what transaction types, and then ask these questions. Is access to information about a user, asset, or transaction type limited to a specific role? So is there something only certain people can do or see? Is there some assets that can only be created or have transactions done by a certain person? And then one that's, we'll get into an example to make more sense, is what unilateral transactions are allowed or required, and how are these governed? I'll give an example. If you're trying to track driver's insurance, what car I buy is up to me. If I keep it in a garage or not, it's up to me. And I might have to allow an IoT device to prove it's garaged. Both of my cars are currently garaged on my insurance. And my wife says someday the garage will actually hold a car. I refuse to believe this, but it's not worth the fight. But if someone wants to give me a speeding ticket, which affects my insurance, that's not up to me. That's up to the person that pulled me over and then the legal process. So that's a unilateral action. That's the government deciding, or some organization deciding. Whether or not I get approved for a loan or not is I choose to apply for the loan, but it's somebody else deciding I'm not creditworthy and things like that. So there are actions that are actually done to us instead of for us. So what I actually like to do is get into an actual use case and play the game I like to call permissionless or permissioned. And I had my favorite one because, there is no right answer. So the difference, always I tell, I taught high school for a couple of years, and you guys, I don't think you've been through this. You have too much standardized testing in your early career, and you started getting this idea that there was always an A, B, C, or D. In reality, a lot of times, there's definitely wrong answers for a lot of things, but there's multiple right answers, and a lot of the questions are answers it depends. So no fear in this exercise, because at the end of the day, we'll probably find out both answers are right, it depends. But has anybody ever heard of putting property titles in the blockchain? Very, very popular, right? Actually being done in several different places. We actually, one of our advisors works with Bitland, is it Bitland Global? Yeah, Bitland Global in Africa. So what's happened in Africa is that people have erased the record for property ownership. They just burned them, they give them to different people, they have a like range. There's no trust at all in property records in Africa. I won't say everywhere, but in a lot of the different countries. Actually, something earlier about this, but Jesse James was a very popular outlaw. Not because he robbed banks, that no one's ever really seemed to love banks, but because he burned the mortgages. So if you're going to commit a crime, which I don't recommend, but if you are, do something with it that makes you popular with common people, so that way they won't turn you in. No one was going to turn in Jesse James, because Jesse James was destroying mortgages. So even though, we can debate about whether they were legal or not, or good or not. Back then, it was probably more questionable. But those records were burnable, and that's been the same problem with paper records today. If you go back to county I actually worked in a while, I was a city councilman in as well. Greena County, Kentucky, in the city of Greena, all the old deeds are still on paper. When I say on paper, I don't mean they're antiques. Like, I think some of them are actually photostats, the original, because our city existed with land deeded for people that served in the Revolutionary War. So we're talking about property records that are like over 200 years old now. And so I think they're actually, a lot of them are photostats of the originals. Some of them also are something called microfiche. If you know what microfiche is, look it up, you'll actually find it quite entertaining. So, property titles. And in this case, we're talking about real estate versus auto titles or something else that can move around. So, who's involved in property titles? No one's bought a house here yet, I think. My son's 21, he's only bought a house. I believe it like 80%, I'm still not sure. I'm worried he's got taken for a ride, honestly. So, whenever you have a property title, who do you have involved? Yeah.
The owner of the
The owner, yeah. I'll say owner, because when you're, most of us just, I don't think I've ever actually owned a house. I've just kind of controlled the property and the name, and somebody else is involved. Who else is involved in property titles?
The bank.
The bank, yeah. The bank, so. That's who actually owns the property. You're just a caretaker with named rights. And you're only 3,000 payments away from your county. Do you have one? Real estate agent? Yeah. Depending on the system, yeah, there's, real estate used to be broad. Or if they're fancy, they're a realtor. And then it has actual real meaning, so if you meet somebody and they say they're a realtor, just go along with it and make it life easier. They'll say it wrong. Yeah.
Like the title transfer office.
Okay, yeah, there's a title, like a title agency. I used to support one, that's why I like this use case. And 7 offices across 3 states, owned by lawyers. Yeah.
The owner of the MBS provides the securitized mortgage.
So maybe a, what'd you call them? An MBS?
Mortgage backed security.
Oh, okay. Oh my gosh, they give me flashbacks to the last crash. I'm gonna call them just a mortgage investor, just to keep it simple. Because there could be more ways to do it, yeah.
Whoever's maintaining the title.
Title, okay, yeah, so there's the, what is saying for this, the county title, the county clerk. Because in the United States, of all the things that goes different in their government, the county clerk is the most common thing. Yeah.
Home purchaser.
Home purchaser, so you have a buyer. During a transaction, you may have a buyer. That's pretty exhaustive, actually. You guys are way ahead of the group of professionals I had in the meetup. So we start. Let's start with the simple case. Let's look at the owner, and the county clerk, and the bank. Just to keep it, let's start with most fundamental. We just want to get the title of the blockchain. Now, you guys have actually created the entire real estate market on blockchain, so congratulations. We now have a startup that will take 5 to 10 years to actually build out. It'll get bought in 3, we'll exit, we'll do it again, and to do some other aspect of it. So only, if you're gonna do this as a startup, pick one aspect to do, because your best thing is to exit in 3 years, and that way you go on to the next one and not violate your non-compete, and then you can get bought again. So then what assets do we have? What kinds of things do we need to have on the blockchain?
The house.
The house, yeah. So it'll actually be the title itself. Titles are actually interesting. Sometimes a title will just be the land, but it will also have this word, that's one of my favorite legal words, appurtenance. And appurtenance is anything that improves the party, the property. So if you have a land that was deeded, then the house gets sold with the land because the land is an appurtenance. Even if it's an eyesore that needs to be ripped down, it's still an appurtenance. So the term improvement is not qualified by the quality of it. But anyways, the other thing that goes with it, like if you're in a neighborhood that has a country club, and you originally used electric cars just to get around and chase a ball. I tried that for a couple of years, and then I got an Xbox, and I found I could shoot people on the head in air conditioning, and so I hated golf anyways. I'm like, why am I outside? This sucks. So now I just play Xbox, which is not an appurtenance of my house. It goes with it. Actually, that's an interesting thing. Things attached to a house are also considered part of the property, but TVs have been brought up, and there's some things you actually negotiate on. So the brace for the TV usually counts, but the TV itself doesn't. But what's an appurtenance gets to be interesting in the title of the house. Whereas like built-in like sound systems and stuff have to stay. So usually things you have to rip out. So what else? Well, if we got a bank, we got a mortgage, right, maybe? Mortgage is, if you decide to take a job in New York or Silicon Valley and buy something, you may find the delights of having 3 mortgages. I think my sister only had 2 in DC and Maryland around it, where you have a mortgage for the house, and then you have a second mortgage to pay for the part the first mortgage wouldn't cover. So that's always a lot of fun. And I'm always surprised they'll give you 2 mortgages when they wouldn't give you 1. Usually they give you like a good mortgage, like a regular mortgage, and then you get like a shittier mortgage on top of it. But that'd be a great flag in there. Like, what's that? What's the STR flag? That means it's the shittier mortgage. So, lien holders are actually ranked too. And then, so for a basic one, this actually covers our players. And then what kinds of transactions can we have? So, what's one?
I don't know, you can buy something.
You buy something, yeah. So there's a, let's see. I'll use it, buying it results in a title transfer. I have the advantage of being in the title industry, so I gotta hear all this stuff. So title transfer, so when you were buying a house, or inheriting it even, I mean, there's, the title transfer is a fairly generic term, but it is a transfer of ownership. What else? So what happens with the mortgage, yeah?
Mortgage payments?
Mortgage payments, well, if we're just tracking the property title, we wouldn't care about the mortgages, but we would care about attaching the mortgage, right? So you would be able to add a mortgage. And then if you make all your mortgage payments, what do you want to do? You're going to remove the mortgage. So again, there's a whole, you guys are getting into a lot of other things. I'm going to try to keep it down to something simple. All right, so far all these things now, the titles never change themselves. They actually do. It doesn't have, you don't think of it that often, but so I actually live in Kentucky. My beard, I have to apologize for my beard. I'm still on the top of my barber what half is. He trimmed me down to almost nothing. And so usually I have a good hillbilly length of beard, and I'm missing my ancestry. I actually mourn my beard. But I live in a section of northern Kentucky where we're converting farmland into neighborhoods. So in that case, what actually happens is the title gets split. We don't have as much new title creation, but we do have split titles. So you actually will see, you will still see title creation. This is usually a split. There'll also be public land becoming private land. And then there's also title, I'll call it, I don't know the term for this, combination. Actually, for some reason it sounds more computer sciencey to me. Title contraction. Which makes sense, thinking giving birth. I'll give you an example. My in-laws have inherited land from the generation older than them. So my father-in-law, actually my mother-in-law, she and her husband inherited land from her parents, but they also owned land that was adjacent to it. And then my sister-in-law, I think actually the land's not needed to them, and they own another parcel of land. So they have the ability, if they want to combine all that into one giant parcel of land, so it gets taxed as one thing. There's advantages, disadvantages, but so you also will see properties get combined. You might see someone buy 2 adjacent lots to build a bigger house. That's not, by the way, real estate-wise, that's not always a good idea. You don't want to own too much house in the neighborhood. But if you ever drive down, and actually I was driving up here, I saw a house that was for sale. It was at a fork in the road. It's really not a great location. But on the corner, there was like a really big, nice house. So I think it's odd to see you only see this in the country, really nice houses, and then houses that cost probably like 25% on what they do. But sometimes people will buy multiple lots, put them together for a single house. So you'll see title contraction. You also will see that with, if you buy a bunch of what was residential and turn it into like a commercial real estate, you'll pull them together. So that happens a lot. Hospitals will do that with buying up land around them. So these are the most common things that are very fundamental to property transfer. All right, so based on this, so the other question is, so who can create a title? Out of the roles we have, can banks create titles? Thank God, no. Can an owner create a title? Can an individual income? No. So we get down to just, these are county clerk. All right, so then who can add and remove mortgages? The bank, okay. But can any bank put a mortgage on your house?
No.
No, so you'd have to agree to it, right? So let's say it's the bank plus owner. JP's in the house, so I'll worry about him getting ideas. You just got a job with JP Morgan, by the way. The bank can put a mortgage in the house. We like the way this guy thinks. People now owe us money we never met. blockchain can put more random mortgages on houses. This is awesome. And then title transfer. It's probably the owner plus the county clerk. So from this, what kind of blockchain do we use? Yeah. Private or private, yeah. Well, potentially private. There's a lot of argument for public because titles are actually public. And actually your mortgages and everything, all this information is actually public. Just a real pain in the ass to get to. You can actually go down to the county clerk, and I think you probably have to pay something, and find out what liens are against, which they call the mortgages, what liens are against the property. So a lot of this is public. So it could be private, it could be public. But we'll say private, get a good starting point. Because there's actually some arguments also for private, like if you're in WetSec, you really don't want to have a lot of public records even though your name's changed. Or honestly, if you come from another country and you're here for protection, that's not a lot of things we run into. But those are things. The more common case I always think about, years ago when Facebook, you guys do know GPS hasn't always existed, right? Good, I just want to make sure. You also know if you get killed in real life, you don't respawn like a video game. That was my military service check for all my high school students, was to make sure they understood that they didn't respawn and keep fighting, that if you went in the military, you'd actually die, because I worry about these things. They turn on location finding in Facebook. So one of the early cases was, there was a young woman who had a restraining order against a former, I think it was a former boyfriend. So she had a domestic grievance, and because of that, she didn't know it was on, he found her like immediately. So it put her at great risk. And this is actually one of the problems, it's all males in here, isn't it? I won't assume anymore, but, you know, assuming this is an all male audience, no judgment one way or the other. But males still dominate IT. And one of the problems with that is that we are at far less risk for, it does still happen though, so don't discount it. I'll say this too, if you're a male and you're experiencing domestic violence, in all seriousness, do get help. Because domestic violence doesn't happen against males. It's not something males will like to admit to, but it really does happen. So by all means, get help. But statistically speaking, females are a lot more risk for a lot more things, right? The gender bias is pretty much more universal in problems than the racial bias. Which is also very real, unfortunately, still. But so you have to think about those kind of things. So those are all good arguments for private. Usually I get public as a first answer. I like to keep it private because those are reasons why information is either private or there's a level of privacy that's required. So then permissionless versus permission, which way will we go? Yeah.
Permissionless because you want to be able to see without asking anyone.
Permissionless, and you're saying
for private, that's permissions because you need to ask.
actually you can go private and permissionless. Yeah, that's why it's the fourth top. That's when it gets or third top. When I go into that, it gets really freaky. But it's not really public. Public. That's interesting. Is that so? Public versus private. That really gives us more of an accessibility. And then I'll write it in the way they're usually thought of. Permissionless versus permission. It's more about maybe accessibility, but authorization, I think, is the right term for security. So the thing is that in a public, or actually even in a private, So if I have a permission blockchain and I put it on a private network, I can still expose title records if I wanted to in a search function. So once I have permission in private, I actually have, private really refers to kind of where the chain's at. But what I like expose now goes to like any other private network. So while Facebook is public facing, actually all the data is stored on private servers. In fact, basic web security tells us that we put everything in a 3-tier architecture. Regulated data requires it with addition, sometimes with encryption, usually with encryption involved. So public versus private, we think about who can access it and how wide is that access versus permissionless and permission, where we think about who's authorized to do things. So if I was going to do this in a permissionless blockchain, how would I control who can put mortgages on and who can create titles versus title transfers? Is there a way to control it?
Is this permission or permissionless?
If it's permissionless, is there a way to control some of these aspects?
Consensus rules?
Consensus rules? Well, the problem is that, so only county clerks put titles in for their county. So if you have a bunch of people voting, it still doesn't make it right.
Well, I mean, someone tries to put it in and everyone else doesn't agree.
Yeah, but the problem is there's actually a legal restriction. So it's not valid. But I could have the titles that get created not be a wallet function. So that's where we get into the system rules and kind of Oracle things, where titles transfer in from a county. So it's actually not directly on the chain. It doesn't go through the chain as someone as a user of the blockchain. It comes in through the side door. So it kind of gets Oracle is the term. And that's the same thing with mortgages. So with permission, it gets to be a little bit easier because now I can define what roles can do what. There's a couple, so for county system, there's a couple of other things that you will end up with. You need to be able to add a lien. And this can be a tax or a judgment. And you can remove a lien. Judgment can be split two different ways. Someone uses both ways, just to please and offend everybody at the same time. So adding and removing liens is another thing that happens, and that actually happens by a court. So this is the interesting kind of unilateral thing that happens, is that you almost always have some sort of legal jurisdiction or a court. Liens get put on for, judgments get put on for different reasons. Most common is tax liens. They'll pay your property tax. They put a lien against you, make you owe the property tax. So that way, if you try to go sell, when you go try to do the title transfer, you have to see who are the lien holders. Mortgages are in order of lien holder. So the reason they call it first mortgage, second mortgage, third mortgage, fourth mortgage. I already got to the level of, I think actually there has been fourth mortgages. If there's a fifth mortgage, I'm really scared. But the lien holders are in order who gets paid first if something happens, like the house gets burned down and they sell the land or something. But then who jumps in front of that? Liens. And some liens will jump ahead of it. So like a tax lien, government always gets paid. That's the fundamental rule of governments. They always get paid. So the lien holder will jump in front if they get there. If it's a tax lien, other judgments could be if someone like slips and falls and you get sued and your insurance didn't cover it, then maybe put against your house if you don't have the money to pay it. My favorite's mechanics lien. So I used to go do cabling in buildings. If I did cabling or installed a rack or something and they didn't pay, I could actually put a mechanics lien against their property. And that way if the property is sold, I actually had to get paid. So basically the lien holders, if you own the house, you get paid last. So all your lien holders have to be cleared out first. If you can't clean out all the lien holders, it could block the title transfer. If you're dead, and then it gets sold and the money gets split up. So there's these different kind of complications that happen. So the reason I like this example is you guys actually like I said, are very, I was impressed this morning both in the class and tonight because you guys are really thinking through this and are on top of it. But it's, you know, the different roles and things for property title. Property title is probably one of the most common things used as the first data thing we can put on a public blockchain, and it's actually problematic. You know, and then if you start adding in more of how transfers really work and things like that, it gets harder. The other reason why it's problematic is that there is no central database of titles. That's why it's actually, this is where the efficiency comes from. To do a closing, you have to find all the liens, and that's part of what's called a title search. There's actually something called title insurance. If you've got blockchain behind titles and title transfers, you can eliminate the title insurance industry, which is a good way to get investment from anybody but the title insurance industry. So, but the other problem is there's, it's controlled at the county level, and sometimes city level puts liens and judgments on things. So how many counties are in Ohio? Does anybody know?
More than 2.
More than 2, yeah, you're right. There's more than, I think there's more than 2 technically in Cincinnati. Cincinnati's not really a city, it's like a quilt of townships. In Kentucky, I'm proud of this. I grew up in North Carolina a lot. 100 counties. Kentucky, 120. We don't have much jobs, we don't have much industry, but we do have 120 counties, which means we have 120 county clerks. That's where all our money goes. We have over 200 cities. So that's a lot, that's one state. Now, as you go west, you will find less counties because older times, you know, times have changed and how things work change. But yeah, there's just way too many counties. So, so you get a lot of those kind of jurisdictional kind of things. But figuring out permission or permissionless really is a lot of what you're trying to accomplish and what you're trying to do. United States, it would be easier to do a permission change and have different levels of transparency to protect the out cases because our property system is highly trusted. When you go into a place where it's not as highly trusted, then you need to have probably a more public chain and figure out different ways to deal with some of these issues so that you can actually engender trust.
Just one example, John.
Yeah.
The startup I'm working with in Florida, they're pretty much trying to solve the same problem, the same idea, but not necessarily transferring properties. Just for the sake, they use blockchain for the sake of verification only. So if I have a house and I want to prove to everyone that that house is mine, I can put a lot of attributes of mine in that house, hash all these things together, get this hash value, and put this hash value in a public blockchain, like Ethereum. So then if anyone wants to see that Arthur is the owner of a certain house, you can just check if the hash value is inside Ethereum.
Right. And for that use case, so if we talk, and that's the other thing about multiple blockchains. So if we just wanted to represent the title, know who its owner is, and what liens are on it, we could just have the county clerks or whoever the registrars are, deeds are. We could have the registrars be the only ones on a public blockchain that have write permission, and everybody else has read as an open blockchain. And now we've solved the title verification problem and created the transparency. And this other kind of stuff to approve transfers and things could be on a different kind of blockchain that's more permission based. So we could actually split the things up. You still have the liens listed, but then anything dealing with it, those kind of business rules, could be in a permission change and you can keep it permissionless. So that's the other reason why you don't always need just one blockchain. And then there's others. Medical records is my favorite. Someone says, we're going to put medical records on Ethereum. And I'm like, I don't want medical records in Russian. Oh, I don't trust that guy that much. He makes me nervous with his shirt off. I don't like that bracelet. But if you see Putin, tell him I love him. Just in case. So this is my contact information. If you want to connect with me, LinkedIn I'm pretty active on. And I spend a lot of my time working with folks on different ideas and things like that. Any other questions or comments on those topics? Yeah.
What are your thoughts on quorum?
Yo, guess what are my thoughts on quorum?
It's similar to like Fabric. That's what the white paper I read is similar to Fabric. They usually have what, 2 consensus requests at this system. forgot what the two are, but one of them is like fabric that has no water tolerance, the other one has water tolerance, and it's much lower, and it's similar to glucose, or glucose reconduction.
Is it bubble?
That's private chain. And then again, they have the chapter. Similar chapter, where you have one database that syncs with everyone, then again, you have a certain transaction.